Hi everybody, I'm Terry Ryder, founder of hotspotting.com.au, and welcome to today's special webinar event. And today's webinar is particularly special because we have double the normal registrations for our webinars, which is testimony to the relevance and timeliness of the topic, which is how the Olympics will turbocharge South-East Queensland property. There's no doubt that confirmation that Brisbane and Queensland generally will host the 2032 Olympics has created enormous energy and excitement for the South-East Queensland economy, and out of that, its property markets. But the question is how, where, and when will the benefits be felt? Will there be a post-Olympics property boom, or the greatest uplift be felt in the years leading up to the event? Now, to help me explore these issues and provide some answers, I'm joined today by Danny Buxton of the 000 Property Group. Danny, welcome.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you to everyone who has registered for this webinar, and very excited to be joining you once again.
So, Danny, perhaps just before we get our teeth into the actual topic, perhaps you could just tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what 000 does.
Sure. Look, at 000 Property, I guess we're investment specialists. We understand the importance of making well-informed, strategic and well-managed decisions that are tailored and specialised property solutions throughout Australia. Our research is independent. Obviously, we work very closely with yourself, Terry, and it's very strategic and relevant to each client's needs. And we certainly believe there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We take a very relational approach with our clients, and the property investment journey is so much more than just a transaction. And we provide that ongoing support and accessibility to our clients throughout the whole process. So we project manage the investment process, we build solid relationships with key stakeholders, and we mitigate risk throughout the building process. We have a lot of fun with what we do, and we have great clients who, for us, just the joy is when they come back again and again and refer clients throughout the process. So,
and I know, Danny, that just recently in particular, you've been getting some great results with clients undertaking new builds, for example, where they perhaps sign a contract and by the time it's finished and ready to move in, there's been substantial capital growth already.
Yeah, 100%. Just recently, we've, again, working with yourself, an area in Gympie, in the Gympie region, a place called Southside, we were able to work with a key developer there, and we've seen clients make in excess of $50,000 in uplift just by the time they settle on the land. We've seen, and that's not hypothetical, we're actually seeing actual sales in that estate that demonstrate that uplift for our clients. Same on the Sunshine Coast. Look, obviously, everyone who has property at the moment in South-East Queensland is seeing great success. But the importance is, I guess, future-proofing that investment when you buy that. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. But we've seen clients in excess of $100,000 uplift just through the process, and that's enabling them to not just create wealth for themselves, but being able to then use that equity to go on to the next project. We've had clients. I've got a great client of ours, Kim, who recently sold her property and enabled them to pay off their home loan and then do the things they want to do in their retirement. Yeah. And so it's just such a joy to be part of that process and to hold their hand each step of the way.
Okay. So I just want to remind everybody who's out there watching, listening, that if you have comments and questions, you can type them into either the chat panel or the Q&A panel, which you should see on the screen in front of you. And towards the end of the broadcast, we'll do our best to respond to as many questions as possible. As VCAS has already put in a question which says there is no evidence, or he's suggesting no evidence in the past that Olympics has caused increase in property prices. Do you have historical data on that? Well, yes, we do. I think we will be disagreeing with you a little bit, Vickers, because I think there is evidence. There's been research done by a number of organisations just recently, which we will be including in our presentation today, which will show that there is a considerable impact from major events, not just the Olympics, but other major events as well. So, Danny, I think you you're going to share your screen with us. And
Yeah, we're just going to do a bit of a slide presentation, just really talking about, I guess, just some of the infrastructure, what's happening, and then really like today to be a conversation as we do, and then obviously invite people to put in their questions and comments, and then work through those with people as we can. So let me just go to my share screen, and hopefully we'll get it all working. There we go. So obviously today is we're just talking about how the Olympics will turbocharge South-East Queensland property prices, particularly over the next 11 years, and where we see that heading. So obviously before we start any presentation, we have the fine print stuff. Look, obviously this is general information. We always recommend anyone, before you make any decision in purchasing a property, that you go seek professional advice, that you talk to your accountant, your financier, understand your own personal circumstances and your needs, and whether property is the right thing for you. So obviously we're big advocates of property. We love it. This is what I do. This is how I invest. I'm actively investing, as I know you are too, Terry. But it's always important to get specific advice around your circumstances. So let's just talk about the Brisbane 2032 Games. And again, look, anyone wanting a copy of these slides, happy to just shoot us an email, and we're happy to send them across to you as a PDF. So obviously there's 3 areas that are being focused on, main 3 areas. There is going to be some other events that can be held throughout Australia and whatnot, but the main 3 areas is the Brisbane zone, Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast. Interestingly, these are going to be the first climate positive games, with a very big focus on clean, green and sustainable. The interesting thing with these games, number one, most games are announced about 7 years out. We're 11 years out, so it allows plenty of opportunity for our governments to really focus on the infrastructure that's needed. Interesting enough, 80% plus of the stadiums, and again, previously, a lot of, when they've had Olympic Games, a lot of spending's gone into building and creating new stadiums, whereas the focus here is actually adding infrastructure and predominantly transport infrastructure into the South-East Queensland. Obviously, this reduced much of the cost of hosting the games, as you can see there, and there's a lot of projects that are already in planning over the next 25 years, and a lot of that's going to be fast-tracked into the next 10, 11 years in time for the games. And the exciting thing is this is now fully funded both by state and federal government, with the 50-50 partnerships, as well as local governments as well. So the games will provide a pivotal role in the region's post-pandemic economic recovery. And I just can't see my screen for a second, so just bear with me. I have lost my screen, so just bear with me for a second.
I can see your screen.
Okay, so it's I've got my notes here too. So driving employment due to the need of for several new venues and stadiums. Creating around about 130,000 direct jobs and many thousands upon thousands of indirect jobs, particularly in tourism, retail, and all the other private enterprise that will invest into the area. I think the great thing with Brisbane being announced, Terry, is that it's really taking Brisbane, and we'll talk about this the other day, from traditionally way back in the day was a sleepy country town or country capital city, as was often referred to, and then obviously with the Expo and the G20, probably into more of a real capital city. But now the focus is Brisbane will be a global city, and will have the eyes of the world on it. And I think that's just really important. I'm going to have to stop sharing for a second if I can do that, but I've just lost my ability to control my mouse. So I do apologise to everybody. Just be with me. There we go. So and now I need my glasses. Interesting enough too, when you look at a lot of the reports, and obviously in preparation for today's seminar, but also to leading up to just doing lots of reading and research, KPMG's economic analysis, $8.1 billion of benefit to South-East Queensland, and 8.5 in federal benefits as well. What are the economic benefits? Well, when we're reviewing, this is CoreLogic, the impact of the Sydney Olympics. From when they announced, we saw Sydney dwelling prices jump by 60%. Going to ABS, when you look at the amount of people, when we're looking at a population, Brisbane currently sits just South-East Queensland around 3.8 million people, and we're seeing that grow to 5.8 million over the next 20 years. And they're actually now talking about that being continue to be sped up and happen a lot sooner than the time frame that they're discussing. The Lord Mayor, Adrian Schreiner, has obviously, as I've talked about just before, we'll see 20 years of accelerated opportunity in infrastructure that's coming into South-East Queensland, particularly around transportation, around roads, road infrastructure, rail, a big focus on helping bring people in. When you look at the Journal of Economic Perspectives, there are real three major benefits. Obviously, improvements in infrastructure, we keep talking about that, increased trade, foreign investment and tourism. And even there will be a little bit of a flow on with economic benefits with post-tourism, post-games tourism, but I don't really see that translating into growth in the actual property market, more so around just the general economy per se.
Danny, you're saying you've been having some conversations with people inside government indicating that there's always long-term planning for infrastructure in South-East Queensland or any part of Australia, but the impetus of the Games means that things that were perhaps had a longer time frame are going to be fast-tracked, put on the front burner rather than the back burner.
That's right. Look, a friend of ours who works for Department of Main Roads and Transport, he just says, like, we now want to do everything in the next 48 hours. So it's creating the massive planning and where they're going to be pushing, particularly around rail, additional stations, expanding the rail networks, improving the rail networks, which just really makes accessibility to the capital city and into Brisbane CBD and different areas and venues a lot more accessible for people. Already in South-East Queensland, I think it's important to note that we are already in a growth focused. South-East Queensland is already growing in value. We're already certainly in a growth phase and a significant growth phase. This is just going to help propel and probably see a more sustainable growth long term over the next 10 years. Will it be as fast and frenetic as it is right now? I don't think that we're going to continue to have the massive upswings that we're seeing at the moment, but we're going to see that consistent, solid trajectory moving forward. And we'll probably see some blips along the way where certainly when international borders open up, I do believe that will also have further interest in property and people wanting to invest in property in a couple of years' time. But just really this fast tracking of infrastructure projects is going to have a big part to play. And anyone who follows you, Terry, knows that you follow the infrastructure and you follow that infrastructure spend. And that's a big part in growth.
I think it's incredibly pivotal for property markets. We're already seeing transformation of the Sunshine Coast through a major infrastructure spend from being a tourist town to a significant city. And the property market has now had 3 years of major price growth. I think the big difference between Sydney and Melbourne and other parts of Australia from 2013 to 2017, when the two biggest cities had substantial property booms, which didn't happen elsewhere in Australia. And I think the big difference was their economies were much stronger because they had such a high level of infrastructure spending happening at that time. So, and out of all that comes demand for real estate. So I think it's very, very significant. Brisbane's already rising in part because has got an elevated infrastructure spend already, and the announcement and confirmation of the Games means that that infrastructure spend is going to be further enhanced as we move forward. And I think it's important to note, Danny, it's not just the government infrastructure, it's not just the construction or the renovation or upgrading of sporting facilities, it's transport networks, and beyond what the governments will do, it's also private enterprise in anticipation of the increased traffic through Brisbane, not just during the Games, but in the lead up to it, means that hotels and tourist facilities are going to be upgrading, expanding. So there's going to be a huge investment in Brisbane over the next 10 years as a consequence of this announcement.
Yeah, I think that's in that second paragraph there where we talk about the fact that improved transport options and travel efficiencies also add to additional amenity introduced to the areas. So both social and retail outlets, we see private investment in major retail shopping centres, but also in businesses and business investing and wanting to be here, which further creates employment, which then further creates the need for housing. Again, you can see here where South-East Queensland, as we said, has already grown at a huge rate, and the transport infrastructure is what we see as key. And its infrastructure is to be built that currently doesn't exist, and particularly those transport infrastructure between Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, and Ipswich as well. And they're probably the three areas coming into the Brisbane CBD. And we've probably seen Brisbane really continue to grow, where it really is encapsulating those other areas from Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast into becoming one big metropolis. And as much as we like our space and green space, and there's a big push for that, we've got a massive need for housing, and there's a massive shortage. And that's just going to be exacerbated by the Olympics coming through. If you have a look at the actual regional infrastructure investment, you can see currently already in play at the moment, and the most significant positive influence on the housing market is going to be the Olympics, leading up to the Olympics rather than the 4 weeks and what we talked about and post. So it's now the next 10 years. I think people who are smart and have the ability to, smart investors tend to get in while they can and position themselves to maximise the growth that they can achieve during that time frame to allow them to build their wealth through property prices. We're just talking just before we started, just the latest stuff from PRD. I don't know, Terry, if you're reading on this as well, and it was something I had in my slides, which is talking about where they see Brisbane house prices could more than double by the time we hit 2032.
Yeah. And they based that, Danny, on, they did, the chief economist for PRD did a study on what happened around the Sydney Olympics in 2000, World Expo in Brisbane in 1988, the G20 Brisbane Summit in 2014. So 3 major events, 3 major international events, and looked at what happened with property prices in the 10 or 11 years leading up to those events, and what happened subsequently. And I think it confirmed what you and I believe, is that the greatest impact actually happens in the lead up to the event rather than post the event. And their research indicated that in the years leading up to and 1 year beyond Expo 88 in Brisbane local government area median house price grew 278%. So that's a massive increase, and it's I don't think the suggestion is that's not the only influence in that upcycle in Brisbane. Certainly, it was an influence because of the investment, the focus, the economic activity that generated, and also significant impact from the G20 held in Brisbane in 2014. Also did a similar study on the Sydney Olympics and similar results. So what we tend to see is that once we have an event announced like the 2032 Olympics, the industry and the media tends to spruik a post event property boom. But I think all the evidence is that the greatest impact is in the lead up because of the investment, the infrastructure, the economic activity, and the media focus in the lead up to the event.
Yeah, yeah. And I just love that comment where she's written there where the G20 2040 summit was the closest we have with the Olympics to understand how house prices could perform and how we can see that Brisbane prices could easily eclipse that performance, particularly given how strong the market is right now. And she even goes on to say, if we could use the growth rate to project the next 12 years, we could expect to see the Brisbane medium house price could soar to nearly 1.5, which is just mind-blowing. I mean, we're sitting around about 650 odd thousand at the moment as a medium house price, which is relatively affordable compared to your Melbourne and your Sydney markets, and even a lot of some of those regional markets in New South Wales. But even if we're going to get half of that growth, house prices will still surge to at least 1.2 million by the time the Olympics begin. CoreLogic, Tim Lawless, talks about the Sydney Olympics as an indication that Brisbane could be tracking a very similarly strong performance. And the Olympics and associated capital works were likely to be a key contributor to the high rate of growth in the lead up to the Olympics. Again, not forgetting that we already are in a growth-focused market. So before we probably go further, I probably just want to just talk about, irrespective of when you buy and how you buy, and we're a big believer in this, you still got to get your ducks in a row. We had an interesting conversation just last week, Terry, with an accountant, and just the importance of building your team and having the right people in your team. And so before you start investing, I think you need to just understand, you've got to start with the end in mind. What is it, your purpose for investing? What are you trying to achieve? Having that really positive mindset, going for gold, but, I talk about being positive, proactive, and taking responsibility. People with a negative mindset don't achieve. If you're going for gold, if we use the Olympics as an example, people with a negative attitude in going into their race or their event, very unlikely they're going to succeed. Be proactive. If we're inactive, we sit still. So we've got to be out there training, got to be researching, getting the right information. But we actually have to do something. We've got to take responsibility. We can't blame our past for the mistakes we've done, but learn from them and have that positive approach and building the right people around you. Make sure you've got a really good financier. Brokers are great, or if you've got a great relationship with your bank manager, but just sit down and understand where you sit right now. What can you afford to do? Have someone who understands property from a legal perspective, who can, before you sign a contract, get them to preview your contract, make sure they know, what you sign up to, what risks are there, understand that whole process. Engage someone like us, a property strategist or broker, who can work with you and identify those who do this 24/7. This is what we do. We live and breathe property. We're constantly out there trying to identify those areas that will outperform, that will achieve better than average. Get yourself market ready. So particularly at the moment, we're seeing, particularly with the shortage of land, you need to have all those things in place. So you've got your pre-approval, you know where you sit. So when the right opportunity comes up, we can jump onto that opportunity to maximise our ability to secure that property for you. Big thing though is don't panic. We do see people panic buying, and you can don't FOMO. As per your webinar just the other week, be very careful when you buy, because you can panic buy and then you'll end up wearing the cost to that. And again, in our conversation we had Terry with Kevin, who an accountant, getting those structures right, know what structure you should be buying that property. These are very important questions you need to have with your team before you even go into signing on a property. But also be smart and future-proof your investment. And again, we want to outperform. We want to ensure that we're going to have continued growth in both the value and the rental appeal to that property, and that it will continue to do what it needs to do. And again, through research is absolutely key. And look, if you can see my desk, I've got hotspotting reports all over my desk. Do your research, continue to look and see what's happening, and get updated research as well, because that research is constantly being updated, and making sure that you to me, I think the best thing anyone can do is become a Hotspotting member and getting access to all those reports. It's a small investment when you're going to be spending $500,000 plus on a property to invest a few $1,000s in getting that right advice. Got to buy with your head, not your heart. Understand what's going on, the infrastructure spend, both public and private. So I'm going to stop my presentation now because I'd like to probably just go into more of a conversation and maybe answer some of the questions that are coming through, and we can just continue to talk about areas and some of that infrastructure that's going in.
Yeah, I just want to touch on a point you made. I think it's really important that people seeing opportunities potentially, such as being generated in Brisbane and South-East Queensland with the Olympics announcements, markets that were rising even before this announcement was made, and now further enhanced by that announcement, that it's so important to still be very, very particular about what you buy and where you buy it. I think we're seeing too many instances around Australia at the moment of people who seem to have the attitude they can buy anything anywhere and they're going to get growth, and they don't need to put in any time to do research and think carefully about what they're buying, where they're buying it. Some reckless behaviour at the moment, and that there's a potential for that to occur as a result of people saying, oh, we'll just buy something in Brisbane and we're going to get growth. I think you need to still be very particular.
And look, also to really beware of the spruikers that will start popping up. We're going to start to see a lot more people out there, the old white shoe brigade promoting great investments and promising this and promising that. And look, every day I get 4 or 5 emails with options for clients, and 99% of them, they just go straight into the delete bin. And again, it's just build a team that's trusted. Don't get caught up in some of the hype. And although we're talking about some significant growth here, it's just about doing your due diligence. And I can't emphasize that enough. Yeah.
I mean, we've already got a lot of comments and questions, and some of them are referring to, can we buy apartments, townhouses, houses? What's going to grow? And I think people, there's a certain reticence being reflected in some of the comments and questions, because I think some people bought high-rise apartments in inner city Brisbane maybe 5-6 years ago when there were a lot of spruikers out there tipping people into those investments, what turned out to be an oversupplied market, and they've had a bad outcome. And it's, I think, another, I guess, a case study of the importance of buying the right product in the right location, even when markets are on the up and up.
Look, and I agree too, and be very careful too. Like whenever you are using someone to assist you in the process, the first question you'll be asking is, how do you get paid? Where's your fee coming from? Where do you earn your income? Often I get packages sent through and offering ridiculous amount of commissions, and that's just added to the price. And when you see a lot of those people who bought a lot of those units, a perfect example of units is Surfers Paradise, down in on the Gold Coast, and they continue to build units. A lot of them are rented to holiday makers, or a lot of unit complexes are predominantly sold to investors. And so, you might have a tower of 60 units, of which 50 of them are going to be investors. And so everyone's competing for the same person to rent that property. You'll have a couple of people who might be in financial circumstances require them to sell it. They'll sell that at a loss. And so when the valuer goes to value that property and they do comparable sales, it then reduces. And people also forget to take into account body corporate fees and sinking funds, which can add a massive cost to your holding costs. And all of a sudden that yield that you're trying to achieve is significantly eroded.
Yeah. So maybe we could turn to some of the questions and comments, because there's a lot that have come in already, and do encourage people to type your comments or questions into either the Q&A panel or the chat box. James is asking, guys, when you say Brisbane, does that extend to Logan and Moreton Bay? And I would say yes. I think when I talk about Brisbane, I talk about Greater Brisbane, includes Logan and Moreton Bay, and also Ipswich City. I think you'd agree with that, Danny?
Yeah, look, 100%. It would even extend to areas like the Sunshine Coast and that Gold Coast corridor, Gold Coast Brisbane corridor as well. There's huge opportunity for securing the right option, but you've got to be very careful. And again, we're very particular about where we go into. But look, there are areas out at in the Greater Springfield that we see significant uplift with the new AFL stadium being built out there for the women's AFL team, which will also be utilised and used for the Olympics. And there'll be events being held out in that area. Look, Moreton, I just think the Greater Moreton, Redcliffe, are areas that we still see huge opportunity for uplift, particularly because they're on still a fairly good, affordable base. Redlands, really like Redlands. It's getting a little bit more expensive, but there's some great opportunities that we see with what's happening out in that Redlands area, and even that North Brisbane area too. So there's great opportunities. It's just identifying the right one that we can see is going to propel a person's growth and ability to maximise that.
Yeah, just apropos what you've just been saying, Jackson's asking, do you think that Ipswich is an area that will boom because of the games? And I think it's important to stress that one of the themes today is that we're not suggesting that Brisbane and South-East Queensland is going to have a boom simply because of the games. We're saying that these markets were already rising, had started an upcycle before the games announcement, and the confirmation that Brisbane will host the Olympics in a decade's time is just adding to the impetus that's already there, and perhaps creating greater certainty that there's going to be substantial growth in Brisbane. I mean, we're seeing, for example, the internal migration data massively favouring Brisbane and South-East Queensland. People are leaving Sydney and Melbourne and heading to other parts of Australia, in that exodus to affordable lifestyle. Brisbane and South-East Queensland is getting a lot of it. An area like Ipswich is a beneficiary of that because of its affordability and its infrastructure and its the future infrastructure spend that's in the mix.
Yeah, as you know, someone mentioned Ripley, that they bought in Ripley 4 years ago and haven't seen a lot of growth. And actually, we were just talking about that off camera before we started the webinar. And Greater Springfield is an area that when you, again, going back to your point with infrastructure, you've got to look at where infrastructure has been spent over the next 20 years. And a lot of that's going to be now fast-tracked into the next 10 years. And so some of that growth might not have been, will still be there, but it will be, in my opinion, be increased. That the growth will just be, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for?
Concentrated on a shorter period.
Absolutely, because of what's going in. When you're looking at Springfield and you're looking at the railway line being extended out to Ripley. But look, again, I also caution, be careful where you buy, because there are parts of Ripley that I won't touch, because I know there's a lot of investment activity. And so when I go into an area, I want to really surround. And one of the big things that you need to look for when you're buying a property, try not to buy in what we call Investorville, where just about every house or every second house is an investment house. You want to have that really strong capital benchmark surrounded by owner-occupiers who are evaluating their property, not going into an area which is just going to be just Investorville. To maximise that growth, to see you get that equity uplift that you're able to pull out and then go out and pull on another property.
So Bart is asking, are new house and land packages susceptible to price increases comparable to capital gains for existing properties? So that's a question that's really right up your alley, I think, Danny.
Yeah, look, you've got to, we're certainly seeing great capital growth for our clients who are doing a new property, where we're seeing significant uplift. Look, I always say, if you're going to build, really, again, part of your team is also having the right builder, a builder that is cash strong, that you can lock in your price, that you've got a guaranteed fixed price contract. So we are seeing some inflationary pressures in the building industry at the moment. And we're also seeing a lot of supply issues. And so there are a lot of builders who are saying, hey, you can buy a block of land, we're not going to start building for 6 to 12 months. There's even been a major builder that has actually terminated a significant number of contracts with a cash payback back to people who sign those contracts for them to walk away, because it's not sustainable for them to build with the increased prices, particularly when land might not register for some time. So for us, we have a panel of builders that we work very closely with, and look, in the last 6 to 9 months, that's actually probably shortened a little bit, because we want to make sure that the builder we're dealing with, that I personally will build with as well, and have built with, is able to maintain the price that is going to have the ability to access materials and build within a reasonable time frame as per their contractual obligations.
Yeah, it's a real issue at the moment. There was actually material published today by master builders suggesting that it's a very, very difficult time for builders, particularly those who have agreed to supply a new house on a block of land at a particular date, at a particular price, finding that there's a shortage of materials and the cost of those materials is rising, and they have a real problem. So it's so important. It's a problem for them, but it's important for people at the other end of the equation, that the home buyers or the investor buyers, to make sure that they've got those sort of costs locked in the contract.
And also too, you've got to know your builder's financial capability. And I'm always wary of a builder. I might have mentioned this in a previous webinar with you, that might have built 10 or 15 homes one year, and all of a sudden they're doing 40 or 50, where they've had a significant growth trajectory in their build capabilities, because that puts undue stress, undue pressure on them financially. And so we work very closely, both with our builders. We obviously go on the QBCC in Queensland, and we were able to see where they sit and their financial capabilities, but also too in working with the HIA, Master Builders Association. So really important.
Danny, we've been referring in our conversation to some of the projections for possible growth in prices in Brisbane and South-East Queensland leading up in the next 10 years, with reference to the Olympics. And John is asking, when you refer to house prices, do you think the same trend will apply to units? Are you including, units and apartments in that particular projection?
Yeah, look, I think in certain areas, I think townhouses and some units will do very well. But again, you've got to be really careful and really understand who the developer is, who they're selling to, who they're promoting, their marketing their property, and really understand the value of that. We often have conversations with one of the leading valuers here on the coast, Heron Todd White, and often just comparing notes on different things. Often I'm peppering them. Fortunately, we're on the same floor in our office complex, so and I enjoy those conversations, because it gives us a better insight too with how they're viewing things, even though they look at from a more of a historical perspective. I think some units will do well, but again, it comes down to the right location. We really focus where we can, though. It's the land that grows in value, and obviously you just got to be wary of, if you are buying a unit, what are the body corporate fees, what is the sinking fund? If you are going to buy an older unit complex, just be very much aware of if there's any major capital works that need to be done to that unit complex, and just be very mindful of that in that process. Yeah. Again, engaging the right property buyer's advocate to work with you in that process will help mitigate a lot of those risks.
On Monday, CoreLogic published its latest monthly report on prices, looking at what happened in July and what's happened to the year, the date, and also what's happened in the last 12 months. And there's been, considerable uplift in most markets around the country. It's interesting to look at the data for houses and then for apartments. And what we've seen is that we've also seen some considerable uplift now in median prices for apartments in most of the capital. In fact, in the month of July, every capital city and every state regional market jurisdiction had some level of increase in their median prices for apartments. And in the last 12 months, some of the growth for apartment prices has actually been at a level that in normal times or so, that's pretty good growth. It's just that it's been dwarfed by what's happening at the moment in housing markets, where there's such exponential.
I think you look at too the demographic of the people who are moving and where people want to live. And look, people are wanting to have a, you tend to be a little bit more confined People like to have a little bit of space, even if it's just to go outside and stretch. Unfortunately, we are seeing lot sizes get smaller and smaller as demand for land and infrastructure that goes into a housing development. A lot of that, the size of land is not necessarily the developer choosing to do that. It's come through council requiring smaller lots and more.
Because they can enhance their rates revenue if there are a greater number of smaller lots. The developer might want to have 100, 600 square metre lots, and the council will say, no, you can have 200, 300 square metre lots because they get more rates revenue. And that's cynical, isn't it, Danny, at times?
100%. But we've also had clients, we've had some clients here on the Sunshine Coast where we've been able to pull together a 4-bedroom house and land on a 350 square metre block, which may seem to many a super small block, but with the right design, ensuring that that property is surrounded by parks and open space, where we've seen clients exceed, $70,000+ uplift just in the purchase of that property, when we can see what other properties are selling for in that immediate area. So if you do it right, you be smart with how you do it. You remember, investment is not about where you necessarily want to live, but it's catering to the needs and the demands of the population and the demographics that are living and moving into that area.
Just referencing back to John's question about whether we're going to see some similar levels of growth with apartments. I just did an exercise this morning for a client looking at what's happened with median prices for apartments on the Gold Coast, and found that there's about 15 suburbs where the median apartment prices have increased by 10% or more in the last 12 months. So there's certainly uplift in the median prices. I mean, median prices can be misleading, particularly with apartments. You need to take them a few grains of salt. It doesn't necessarily mean property values are rising to that level. But nevertheless, it was enlightening to see just how much growth has been in median apartment prices in so many locations across the Gold Coast region just in the last 12 months. So as a product that can grow in value, just got to be very mindful of the propensity for developers to create oversupply in popular markets. We've seen that in inner city Brisbane in recent years. We've seen it in Surfers Paradise periodically. We've got to be careful.
I think that's the way you've got to look at the land, the area that where you're going to be. If you are going to go into a unit, understand the area that you're going to be buying into, understand what the needs are within that area, and where there is a demand for that particular product. Look, over time, I mean, certainly 10 houses. We are seeing a lot of terraced housing product coming out now, which is becoming a bit more popular, which is like a townhouse with your own title. And that has, for some people, from an affordability perspective, is a way to get their foot into the market. But again, just be really wary of the body corporate fees. I know I keep harping on that, and making sure that it's in the right spot, and more than happy to sit down and chat with someone about that when the time's right.
Teresa, with her questions, referencing our comments that there's been some research done in past major events and looking at what's happened to property values in the lead up to those major events. And there's been substantial property growth in Brisbane and previous international events the city has hosted. So, is there a way to identify other influences that may have contributed to the property boom figures, and what percent can be attributed to each of these influences? And I would think not. It's very hard to separate out. You can look at how much prices have grown and saying this coincided with the lead up to this event. But in terms of, which factor had the most influence and what percentage, I think that's not possible.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And hi, Teresa, I can see you're there. So good to see you on the webinar. So, but look, anytime when we source options and things for clients, you just got to look at what is going on in that immediate area. We sit down, for example, when we went up to Gympie and we looked there, we didn't just, we went out on the ground, we spoke with councillors, we spoke with people in business, spoke to a variety of different agents who are in the local market, just get a really good understanding of what's happening, and then trying to choose the right area. We're able to pull together a couple of packages, although not necessarily for traditional investment, for the special disability areas, in a place like Beachmere, which we just saw massive amount of change and urban renewal going on, gentrification in that little suburb, which used to be just an old sleeping village, sleepy fishing village, which has now got a beautiful estate that's just been developed with very expensive houses being built, which are 1 or 2 blocks back from the water. Again, is it somewhere I might want to live? Not necessarily, but is an area that we're going to see uplift 100%.
So you're just saying, so just following on from some of those projections that we referred to, I think there was reference to some of the projections from CoreLogic. If Brisbane achieves a certain growth rate based on the research for other major events, then this median price could reach a certain level. And so you're just asking, so if we buy in a growth corridor of something around 680,000, based on the projections assumed to double in 10 years, is this true? What do you think about that, Danny?
Well, I've always said I don't have a crystal ball, so I rely on people much smarter than myself. So we sit down and we look at the data and the research. When you look at like the information that's come out from the chief economist from PRD, and they're suggesting, we could see it more than double. Look, even if it goes half that, it's still going to be significant uplift and significant growth. But look, I think if you just buy smart, again, you can look at historically, like last time South-East Queensland really went through a big growth surge of what we're seeing now. It was 20 years ago. It was in 2000, 2001, 2003. And then floating to 2004. We saw a blip in 2007 and 8. And then it's pretty been just consistently just tapping along. For us, is identifying those areas where we can actually outperform. And we've seen clients double their money, even during those quiet times, by just being a little bit smarter with where they buy and buying those pockets where we see great value. And that's why it's important to get yourself really market ready. So when those opportunities do come up. So do I believe that property can double? Yeah, I do. But it's just been, I guess, making a really good calculated decision with your right team around you. Just recently, I've sold on a property myself and already seeing growth occur in that property just in the short time that I have it. But the reason I bought into that area is because I see that continual uplift and the growth and the infrastructure is going to happen in that area, which will naturally see a concentrated growth that I would have maybe seen over a longer period of time.
Yeah. Like I know there's kind of a cliche out there that says, property doubles in value every 10 years. And it is a cliche and it's not necessarily true. It's certainly not true of every area. Look, yeah. If property in a particular location grows at an average rate of 7% a year over 10 years, it means it will double in 10 years. But what I know to be true from the research that we do regularly on prices for every town and suburb in the country is that growth rates that high are actually quite rare for the last 10 years. But there are probably the best in the country and most of in Sydney and Melbourne, other parts of the country, the best growth rates, a small number of suburbs, is maybe 8% per year average, which means those locations have doubled in value in 10 years. But most locations haven't achieved that. It's very location specific. There are some locations where the median price today is the same as it was 10 years ago, and it's some locations where it's less than it was 10 years ago. So you can't make the assumption that property is going to double every 10 years. It's very much a case of choosing the right location that's got the identifiable drivers for growth where you might achieve an outcome that positive.
I think it's a really good point. It's very rare you see that consistent 7 or 8% growth. When you look at a cycle, and that cycle could be a 15, 20-year cycle, there's no exact science to when those cycles occur. But when we do go through a growth phase, around about 70% of the growth will happen in that growth surge. So let's just assume it's a 20-year, for the exercise of this conversation, for this conversation, it's a 20-year cycle. We may see 3 or 4 or 5 years of really good concentrated growth, where we see that really big upswing. But the rest of the time, it's just going to just do its thing and bubble along. What excites me about the Olympics, or excites us both about the Olympics, and obviously many others who research this, is a lot of that growth surge happens when there's big infrastructure spend. We're going to see that concentrated infrastructure spend consistently over the next 7 to 10 years leading up to the Olympics. And so it's identifying where those projects are going to be, and then being able to then find those little pockets in there where we can hopefully outperform the rest of the market.
Well, Craig's asking a question, and it's very relevant to what you just said. Craig's asking simply, how do you track future infrastructure projects?
Well, it's quite simple. You just need to go on to the Queensland government or whatever local government and state government websites, and then be able to work through where those things are occurring. We're fortunate that we also have some very good relationships with key stakeholders. We're constantly peppering and probably annoying them of late, but it's also boots on ground, talking to council, talking to the right people to see what is occurring and where things are happening. For example, when you look at Springfield and you see what's happening in that Springfield area, and you go on and you see the infrastructure and the works that are in place. When you looked at Gympie and you see the major projects that have been announced and are actually under construction and have been fully funded to occur. You see the upgrade in the highway, and we access certain tools on the net which allow us, and subscriptions allow us to get up-to-date mapping, so we can actually see in real time what is occurring on the ground. It was certainly very helpful at the moment when we're all locked in and locked down, to be able to see that occurring.
So infrastructure is something that we track every day at Hotspotting, because we think it's so influential. It's something that we really look for when we're trying to identify the future growth areas. So we're pulling in information every day, and we're filing it and recording it, and organising that information, and all of our location reports that go into our reports, such as a top 5 Brisbane hotspots, for example. At the back of each of those reports are usually several pages listing projects that are on the books, that are under construction or proposed for areas, because we find that to be a very key factor to consider in making our selections on locations.
I can't, again, just understanding that infrastructure that's going on, and to the person who asked, how do you track? The best thing you can do is subscribe to Terry's, and I'm not giving you a plug because of this webinar, but honestly, Terry, it's over the years that we've utilised your resources have just been very beneficial, and our clients have just seen great success because of it. And
Tindra is asking, did we see unprecedented growth in Sydney prior to the 2000 Olympics? I don't know about unprecedented, but there is the evidence and the research that's been done by a number of parties with reference to the Brisbane announcement. There's some specific research being done, and that does indicate that there was unusual uplift in Sydney in the lead up to the 2000 Olympics, as there was in the lead up to Expo 88 in Brisbane and other major events. And I also observed it quite the most recent, I guess, precedent I can refer to is the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast in 2018. And again, the industry was spruiking a post-games boom. That didn't happen. What did happen was there was notable uplift in the Gold Coast market in the 2 to 3 years before the event. And against the same factor, it was enormous investment in infrastructure and in other facilities on the Gold Coast, both by government and private enterprise, in the years leading up to that event. And that brought people into the Gold Coast to live and work in those projects. And there was a considerable uplift in rents and prices at that time. So I think the evidence is strong that that is what does occur and is likely to occur in the case of Brisbane and other parts of South-East Queensland.
Right. Also important to know, again, talking about this offline too, is well, there's still other areas outside of South-East Queensland that will see great growth, and some of those regional areas where we see real opportunity. But look, long term, property is a long-term investment. If yes, we're seeing some really good uplift for our clients and some significant uplift in a very short period of time, but it's about future-proofing that investment, where we want to see that continual rise, continual growth wherever possible. And certainly, again, we just keep coming back to that same thing. Infrastructure is such a key part of that. And when you look historically with where you follow the growth trajectory of property values when there are major infrastructure projects going on, and particularly around transport, because it brings not just state and federal government spend, but as we said before, a lot of private spending as well. A lot of private infrastructure then also is added into the mix, which then further increases that economic benefit.
Yeah. With reference to a number of things you've just said, Stephen's asking, what's your opinion on the Toowoomba market in the lead up to the Olympics?
Look, I think there's great opportunity in Toowoomba. Again, got to be really careful where you buy. We've seen, again, I see a number of opportunities that come across my desk on a regular basis. And when we look at an option for a client, it's identifying what sort of spend they want to, the sort of money we want to spend. And sometimes I can see better value elsewhere. I'm not saying no to Toowoomba. I think Toowoomba will benefit and will see some growth. And there is some infrastructure going on up there, which is quite exciting. But again, just be really careful where you're buying. And to me, I see right now probably better value in that Great Ipswich area than Toowoomba. That's just my personal opinion. Terry, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Toowoomba's has got great potential, and again, it relates to infrastructure. I mean, Toowoomba has its new airport, which is a bit of a game changer, but an even bigger game changer is coming, and that's the Inland Rail Link, which is now under construction. It's the section to carry the construction over the border from New South Wales into Queensland, heading towards Toowoomba, is soon to start, and Toowoomba is the pivot point. That's going to be huge for Toowoomba. Other big things happening, major new hospital. Look, it's quite a long story. We could actually have a whole separate 1-hour webinar on Toowoomba, but I think it's got great potential, and it's not really got anything to do with the Olympics. It's just about what's happening in that market locally, very much based around infrastructure. Paul is asking the question, why is it important to invest in areas with a certain percentage of owner-occupiers? It's something you referred to a couple of times, Danny, and I think it's probably a good question. You certainly like to be in areas that aren't dominated by investors.
Yeah, 100%. So when we look at an area, we're really wary of and want to understand how many investors are going into that area, even at a not just a macro but micro level. So right into an estate. We like to be in estates if we are doing new house and land where it's hard to get into, because there's a real focus for owner-occupiers. Owner-occupiers tend to, they spend more money on their house. They're always adding improvements, value adding to their property. We're also not competing against others who want to rent. When you want to put your property for rent, a perfect example is an area in Springfield where we looked at in an estate cleaner, which is a Stockland development. Very hard for people to buy investments in there. We are very fortunate with some key relationships. We're able to access some options there for some of our clients. And that's where we've seen that increased uplift straight away. The example in Gympie, which we talked about, was an estate which was all owner-occupiers. And we had to work very hard with the developer to allow investment to go in there, because he wanted to preserve the integrity of that estate and the quality of the homes in that estate. And, we're able to do a mix of salt and pepper of investment homes in that estate, and immediate uplift of over 10% just on clients settling on their land. And so, whereas if I went into another area where I know there's an estate which might have a lot of investment activity, they're just going to be same house after house after house, with investors. And I think it detracts long term. And when we talk about future-proofing your investment, that's a key part and a key consideration to take into account. But remember, owner-occupiers tend to, not always, but we tend to value add to our property, add improvements, and tend to not overcapitalise, but we do spend more on our home than what we would if we were doing it for investment.
we've already ticked over the hour, Danny, so we'll have to look at wrapping up fairly soon. Look, there's a number of questions or comments from people who basically saying, look, I bought in a certain part of Brisbane, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I've had no growth. And I understand that, as I've had lots of conversations with people and strategy sessions and in mentoring sessions where they bought in a location and it hasn't really performed for them yet. I think what we're saying is that, well, Brisbane hasn't performed particularly spectacularly over the last 10 years. We're suggesting that the next 10 years is going to be a whole lot better because there's momentum already in the Brisbane market through the infrastructure spend, through the population data, the affordability comparison, the exodus to affordable lifestyle. And that's going to be enhanced by the announcement about the 2032 Olympics and all that it will unleash. So I think those who have properties, some of them are down in Logan City where there hasn't been much growth in the last few years. I would suggest that you be patient because I think some growth will be coming your way. And also it's always important to keep in mind that real estate is a long-term investment and it doesn't always perform every year for a 10-year period of ownership, but you will have, if you've bought in a good location, some uplift, some significant uplift throughout a 10-year period. So hold on and be patient, I would suggest.
I 100% would agree with you, Terry. Look, in the days when you invest, you want to outperform, and it's really important to get the key research, understand what you're trying to achieve, and build that right team around you so you can outperform the market. And even in the quiet years when we've hadn't had traditionally or history where we've seen fairly flat growth, we have seen some significant uplift for some of our clients. And just give a very quick example. I looked at a property back in 2012 down in Brisbane. We presented it to a client. They weren't 100% sure at the time. So I bought it myself. And then just after we built, we had the floods in 2013. I got my property revalued in about 2-3 months after that, as I was purchasing another property and using the equity in that. And that property had actually gone up 16% uplift during that time frame when technically the Brisbane market, and again, we want to understand there are markets within markets. And that's a key thing to look at. The Brisbane market had, on average, seen a 4% drop. And so you could argue we outperformed the market by 20%. But again, it's just looking at those key things that were occurring. And we saw infrastructure, we saw the tunnels being built in Brisbane, the access to the tunnels. This is a place in Nudgee, and we just saw great opportunity there and uplift, immediate uplift, which allowed me to then duplicate a lot sooner than somebody else. And so I think it's a key consideration to take into account when you invest.
Just quickly zipping through a few of the other questions before we wrap it up, Danny. There was a question there relating to what if interest rates rise, will that halt the momentum? Look, I just think the whole thing about the connection between interest rates and property prices is completely overrated in media and by economists. I don't think there's any particular relationship there at all. The drivers of the boom that we're currently experiencing in Australia are many and varied, and I don't think record low interest rates has a great deal to do with it. We're already actually seeing interest rates rise, particularly fixed rates. It's not slowing down the momentum to this point, and I don't think it will. And apart from that, the Reserve Bank's made it clear again and again and again, it's got no intention of changing the official cash rate anytime in the next couple of years. Carly was asking, is any specific areas likely to enjoy price growth due to the Olympics? I think there's going to be general uplift, but there is some research which was published last week by PIPA, the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, that they did, which indicated that there is some evidence that the suburbs that have the big venues for the Olympics tend to have perhaps higher growth than other locations. So there is some research suggesting that, but that's just one school of thought. You guys asking, is Brisbane seeing population growth? Yes, definitely. South-East Queensland is getting major uplift from internal migration, more so than any other part of Australia by a wide margin. And will the growth surge when immigration, when borders reopen? Well, I think we're going to have a big influx of overseas migrants when that does happen. And that's going to give us another wave of growth throughout Australia, in fact. Look, there's a whole lot more questions. I'm sorry we haven't been able to get to all of them, but we have actually extended over the 1 hour, and we do have a larger than normal audience for today's webinar. So we better wrap it up. Danny, is there anything you want to do also?
Absolutely. So just want to thank you, Terry, and for everyone for tuning in and being a part of this webinar. So I just want to share my screen here. Not sure if I'm doing this right. Here we go. I'm just the technical that I am. So we've just want to just give an offer to anyone who does come and wants to have a chat with us, an obligation-free chat. And if you want a copy, you can more than happy just to shoot us an email at invest@000property.com.au. And look, anyone who works with us and ends up purchasing a property through us, we will extend a 12-month subscription to your Platinum Gold membership, which is valued up to $2,000. And we'll just do that on as a way to say thank you, because I think education is absolutely key during your property journey. So there's our details there. Invest@000property.com.au, and just shoot us an email or jump onto our webpage and fill in a form, and we'd love to have a chat. But thank you, Terry. Thank you, everyone else, for joining in. And there's so much more we could talk about, in particularly with areas and areas that we see real opportunity in. Again, getting yourself market ready and getting yourself building your team is absolutely imperative. And you need to build your team before you build your portfolio. So we'd love to be a part of that journey with you.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Thanks everyone for your participation today, for your comments, your questions. I think it's been a great session. We could have gone on for another hour talking about these issues and responding to questions from people, and I apologise to the people if we didn't get to your questions, but you are welcome to follow up by contacting either Danny. His contact details were on the screen just a moment ago, or you can also contact me, ryder@hotspotting.com.au, if you have a particular question you'd like answered or comment you'd like to make. With that, let's just say goodbye and thank you, in particular to Danny Buxton from 000 Property. I urge you to follow up and talk to Danny. As he said, it doesn't cost anything to have a conversation, and just perhaps talk about your situation, what you hope to achieve with property investment. Okay, let's do it again soon, Danny.
Thank you very much. Look forward to it.
Okay, bye for now.